So there's many different options that you can consider if you're looking to start your own compost pile. You could do the 3-bin method. You could do a hot composting. It takes a little bit more effort, a little bit more time, but you get great results, great nutrient levels, but it can take a little bit of work and dedication to making sure that the compost isn't rotting or getting mold in it. An alternative option is a cold compost method, which uses more dry organic material like leaves or grass clippings in the compost pile itself, and kind of strays away from the kitchen scraps or the fresh green material that would throw off a lot of heat in the composting method. And that takes a bit more time, might take an extra season or two, but it will also give you great results in your soil if you choose to add it to your garden bed the next year. Alternatively, there is a pit composting method, which you take all of your composting, your clippings, your kitchen scraps, and you put it directly into the ground. But if you don't have the space for some of those methods and you're looking for something maybe to put on your deck, or if you have a small yard, there's a number of different recycling, food recyclers or recycling bins that you could use that take up a far less amount of space. But if that's maybe not what you're looking for, there's a number of kitchen composters or small bins that you can keep even inside your house that have a relatively low scent or low odor that can be managed for smaller units like maybe bungalows or townhouses that don't have the space to do a complete garden, but maybe want that extra little boost to put in their flower pots or their raised garden beds. So one of the composting options available is what you call pit composting, and that's taking your leafy green material, your prunings, your clippings, whether that's from your yard or from your kitchen. You can make a spot in your yard maybe that has a poor soil composition. This is pretty sandy, so that's not going to have too much nutrients. It's going to be a really well draining soil, but you're going to want to add stuff to it. You're going to want to make sure it has a bunch of nutrients in it, that it has nitrogen, that it has potassium. So by taking, your clippings or stuff that you aren't going to take from your garden or leftovers from your kitchen, and you're just going to put it in this pit. By leaving it open, it exposes some of that more material to the environment. It's going to break down a lot faster. You might want to take some of the dirt. Right here we have a mix of some black earth and some just sand from the area. So this could look like last year's potting soil that you take out of your flower beds. You could add that to this pit, and it will kind of mix in, and by having some of that soil in there, it keeps it down, it keeps the moisture in, and it will help it break down a little bit. All of this green material here is going to break down and mix into the soil around it and create a better soil composition. It's going to return nutrients and minerals back into the soil so that if you wanted to plant something here later on, it will be full of all of that goody stuff that you want to make your vegetables nice and green and leafy, to make sure that your root vegetables are growing into large portions. This is one of the ways that you can do that.
White Kochaite, Emma Gottfredson means Squawks, to the Kremlusask Aglin. Today I will be teaching you words in Sequat Machtin from our video. La Eska so ach. Ta us ka stok min chestem. Ta us ka stok min chestem. Ta us ka stok min chestem. Stok wish. Stok wish. Stok wish.
So we're going to do the layer mulching, which is a soil building technique that you can plant right into, especially in a raised garden bed. And these guys are going to help me. We're going to pull together all the different materials. It's basically layering carbon and nitrogen, carbon and nitrogen, carbon and nitrogen with different organic materials that break down over time. So it's sort of like composting in place. Anyway, so we're going to start with some cardboard, and we're going to put 2 layers on the bottom of here, and make sure you guys can grab a few and make sure that they're tucked right in and all of the soil and weeds are covered, or bend it. There we go. Okay, we'll pull that a little bit that way. Get in here and wet that down. Wet it down real good, like a swimming pool. And we're gonna shovel a bunch of manure in here. Just want to make sure that the cardboard gets good and wet so that the manure sticks to it. And the cardboard is sort of like a weed barrier, but it's also a source of carbon. Okay, that's good, Paige. So yeah, any kind of manure will work really well. You can even put pretty fresh manure. I wouldn't use fresh cow manure or horse manure in the top of a garden, but goat and llama and sheep and whatnot can go generally in the garden. So we want to get about 4 inches in there. Yeah, the trick is, yeah, that's really good. The trick is to get it good and wet. And if you guys see any rocks in there, pull those out too. So basically right now we've got a layer of carbon, which is the cardboard, which is going to sort of mulch out and kill off the weeds eventually. They're not going to get any light or air or anything. Then we put about 3 inches of goat manure in there and wet it down. So that's carbon and nitrogen. Manures are all nitrogen. So we want another layer of carbon, and because it's so low and it's going to take a long time for it to break down, I'm going to add at this point some wood chips. And that'll be our next carbon. This part's easy, and just kind of spread that over, and we'll get water again. Okay, so now we got some carbon, nitrogen, and carbon. And oddly enough, coffee grinds are nitrogen. Even though they're brown, generally speaking, you can say that all green things are nitrogen and all brown things are carbon, but that's not the case with coffee grinds. We could be putting grass clippings or any kind of green kind of stuff right now. Grab a few handfuls of coffee grinds if anybody wants to get their hands very dirty and coffee-like. So at this point, I'm gonna add some other elements that'll help the stuff break down. I'm going to throw some bone meal in there. And this is Gaia Greens. It's a green sand. So this is where you're going to be adding a lot of your micronutrients. And basically it's just minerals. So it's broken down. It's called green sand. You can get it from different, but I like this stuff because it's organic. And really just sprinkling that in. This is the bone meal. And at this point I would be adding, well, actually a little bit, I'd be adding some worms, but I don't have any right now, so I'm gonna put worm castings in and hope there's some eggs in there. This is spent straw or spent bedding, but it's straw, not hay. You don't want to put hay in, especially on the top, because hay has weed seeds. Especially the top layer of your garden bed. If you put a layer of straw on, it helps keep the moisture in the soil and keep the weeds from growing up. A bit more cardboard, and make sure you take the tape and all of the staples and stuff out. And the trick is to get it good and moist between each one. This is leaf mold that I collected from last fall, and it's already started to break down. So we're gonna add that, and if I can get you to rake that in. Okay, so leaf mold is technically a carbon. If we were putting it on when it was green, it would be a nitrogen, but it's broken down. So we're gonna add some of the manure. We'll get this sort of distributed as evenly as we can, a little bit here, a little bit in the middle. Beautiful. Okay, so rake that up and we'll get it wet down. Now I'm gonna talk a little bit about pine needles. We've got plenty of pine needles in the Kamloops area. Our soil in Kamloops is technically very alkaline. and the pine needles add or make it a little bit more acidic. So if you're growing anything like blueberries or azaleas or anything like that, it's great to mulch your blueberry plants with this. But because we want to build this as a balanced soil, we're going to add a little bit of the pine needles too, and just a little bit because they are acidic, so you'll maybe an inch layer or so. Okay, and at this point I'm going to put some eggshells in, and this is just adding a bit of natural calcium. It'll also help keep slugs out of your garden. Tough eggshells, I bake these and then crumple them up, and then they're super sharp, and they cut up any slugs or bad bugs that try to get in your garden. Okay, remember I talked about putting worms in at this point. We don't have any live worms because I gave them all to the school gardens, but we're going to do worm castings, which worm castings is just basically what comes out the other end of the worm after it eats all your compost. Here's evidence of this being horse and cow country. This is alfalfa, which is grown as a feed. So as long as this hasn't gone to seed, it's fine to put it in your garden bed. It'll just compost down. Yeah, we got to get rid of it anyhow. You got to do a chop and drop method, which means just cutting it down and leaving it in place before it goes to seed. Okay, and this is a little bit more of that green sand, which is just our mineral content. Yeah, this is just when you don't have a whole lot of soil to work with. You can build these layer mulch beds on gravel roads, and after about 2 years, black earth, full of organic microbes and earthworms and whatnot, and I was like so pleased that I actually in 2 years built that much soil. So it's really amazing. What people don't realize is your soil health and the amount of microbes that are doing their thing. This is just kickstarting that whole process. Okay, I think we're gonna wet that down. Awesome. We're gonna put another layer of manure, and then we're gonna put some fresh straw on, and then we can start on I call it the icing on the cake, when we get to put the really good soil on and get it ready for planting. If we were trying to fill this full of the good, expensive finished soil, it would be about almost a yard per bed. So if you try to go buy that at Art Naps, it's $56 a yard, or a scoop is what they say. So Russell, when you were gardening throughout your life and career, did you guys use a lot of like manures and amendments?
This reserve was very fertile.
Very fertile?
We were the hub city of gardens. Kamloops produced more gardens than all the world. They had a cannery just on the other side of Overlander Bridge. Potatoes, carrots, onions.
And that's true local food security.
Everything was here. We never used this stuff. This stuff never even existed. We never came into our life.
Which stuff?
The stuff we were doing here.
No, this is just speeding up that process of building the fertility in the soil that took hundreds of years.
Yeah, but this ground here was everything here. That field right behind us here, where that house is.
Yeah, Kamloops' soil is pretty, in the valley bottom is good.
Tomatoes, carrots, onions, cucumbers. We even had watermelons, and you name it, they put it out.
Did you have a garden here on the reserve, like in the valley bottom?
I had about an acre of land there that I did my own gardening.
And what were you growing mostly?
Tomatoes, potatoes, peas, onions, carrots, you name it, I did it.
Awesome.
And I never went to this stuff. I just rotor-tilled and cleaned her out, and that's all we did. There was not a family on this reserve that didn't have a garden.
So now we're going to put on a little bit of the straw, about 4 inches, wet it down good. So this is our last layer of nitrogen going on with the manure. Look out! Russell's coming in. Yeah, we'll rake that flat, Natica, and then now we can put on our final layer of the good soil. Although I have seen these gardens built just by pit composting too, just putting all your vegetable scraps in the bottom, covering it with the nitrogen and carbon, and then it all breaks down over time.
Here it was all dead.
Okay, you guys, that's good and wet. And this is a really good organic composted topsoil. So it's a manure chicken and beef feedlot mix, but really top quality. This is made out in Westwold View Farms as a big production. It's $27.50 a yard as opposed to like $56 a yard. I should have bought some plants, but you know it's going to be really cold tonight. Okay, now we need to we'll get this leveled out and then wet it again, and you'll see that it'll sink quite a bit because the layer right underneath of this is the straw.
At Skeetcheston here, we're also worm farmers. And what that means is we keep some worms and we look after them and we feed them and make sure that they have a proper amount of moisture.
And the reason why we wear gloves is because the salt off our skin and our hands, the worms do not like that on their skin.
This has been probably about 3 years worth of worms, and we started out with just maybe 40 or 50 little worms. So what do we want to give our worms and what do we not want to give our worms?
Fruits and vegetables, coffee, ground and tea bags, pasta, paper and junk mail, nuts, shells, cardboard.
And things to avoid?
But you should never put meat or dairy products in worms.
So you could put a little bit of onion or citrus in here, but not too much because it burns them.
Yeah.
And you want to keep them in the dark. Yeah. And then you shred up newspaper.
Yeah,
They love to eat newspaper.
Yeah.
They love eggshells. They love coffee grounds.
And if you mix it up a lot and you put it into a food processor, they actually like that. And if you get the newspaper a little damp, it actually helps the worms dissolve it in their tummy.
Yeah, and they like to be kept nice and damp. The reason why we like to keep worms is because the compost that they make is probably the best thing you can ever put in your garden. This is going to help your plants be really strong and healthy, and you can even put some worms into your garden beds as well, and that helps to enrich the soil and keep the air flowing around the roots of the plants. You just get this is coconut fiber and you get it all wet, and then we'll transfer some of our worms into this one. We've got some shredded newspaper, and yeah, we'll have 4 of these on the go, plus other types of compost that we'll have here at the school, so our garden will be extremely well fed. Hey guys?
Yep.
And I think these are, if you wanted to buy one, I think they're about $30, the worm bins, and it's really fun.
Emma. M-A. Emma. Sextum. Sextum.
Okay, we're back at Skeetcheston School talking about composting. I'm here with Dante, one of Miss Zoot's students. So this is 2 bins out of a 3-bin system. So how it's designed is all of these boards come out. Okay, so when it's full and it's all starting to compost down, we can take all the boards out and we can harvest the fresh compost or the finished compost from the bottom. It'll still have some twigs and stuff in it, so we'll sift it out and then it can go directly on the garden. This is a longer term system. It takes probably 3 months out of the summer for it to actually start composting. The trick to composting is your carbon and nitrogen ratio, right, Dante? Mm-hmm. So how do we layer it? Do you remember?
So first we have this on the bottom, and then we put the hay on top of this.
Okay, so we put our green, which is weeds and food scraps, and remember we went and picked all the alfalfa because it has a high nitrogen content. So we put a layer of this about 4 to 6 inches, and then we put spent straw on top of that. Can't really see, here's some straw. So we put straw about 4 to 6 inches on top of that, and we just keep layering it like that. In between, we might throw some eggshells in here.
Some banana peels.
Banana peel, but those are supposed to really go to the worms. But we put green and brown. So green is nitrogen and browns are carbons. So there's a ratio and whatnot. There's all different ways of composting. We've set this up for so that it can take a lot of the weeds, a lot of the spent things that we pull out of the ground. This here is a perforated tube that we put in the center so that air and water can get down there. So the other trick to this is to not let it dry out. I'll often, before I close it down, I will come and put it on shower, and I'll wet it all down, and then I'll just fill this up so it goes all the way down to the bottom. Okay? So Dante will wet that one down over there, and then we should probably bring a little bit more. And then, because in the wintertime we don't want too much moisture to get in there, we have the lids that close down on it, and that keeps a lot of the rain and or the snow out once we've got a moisture, because so there's a fine line between how wet and how dry. You don't want it too wet. The other composter that was over by the worm bins behind, it's a Jora composter. It's a tumbler, and often kitchen scraps go in there, like you guys' lunch stuff.
Bananas.
Does it get all stinky and wet?
Yeah, and apples, and then you have to twirl it, and that mixes it, so not all the stuff is just rotting on top. So it flips it, and then it rots on the bottom as well. So it's top and bottom.
But you also have to add, because you're putting a lot of food scraps in there, which is nitrogen-based, we have to add carbon to it. So when we add carbon, that is what starts balancing out the act of heating it up and getting all the good bugs to do their thing, because that's what composting is all the microorganisms in the food scraps and in the carbon, and they start eating it, and they promote sugars, and then it starts breaking down. So there we go. That's a little bit about composting.